here's Ed Bernstein.
Well, with me is a congressman who is dubbed. Are you the Snapchat King? what is your
Snapchat King.
Swalwell. King.
For
Swalwell.
a while, there wasn't much competition.
Swalwell.
I was the only one on Snapchat in Congress, but I've tried to get other colleagues on just as another way to communicate to the millennials.
Which and how important is that? I mean, you've been in Congress what, 3 terms already?
Third term. Yeah,
Third term.
My third term right now. And I think that this next generation, they're the largest generation our country's ever known, most diverse generation, best educated generation. But when it comes to politicians, they're very skeptical. And the best thing that we can do, I think, is just be real to them, communicate to them on their platforms. I tell my colleagues, if you're on Insta Story or Facebook Live or Snapchat, just go with the first take. Don't delete it and record it again.
Don't make it fake.
They want you to be yourself, and that's more important to them than anything else.
Right. Now, some would say that whole analysis that you just did with how intelligent people are on the internet, some would say that some of the followers of other candidates are actually the opposite of that intelligent and educated class of voters.
Well, I actually think that we should kind of get away from insulting anyone that elected Donald Trump. We can dismiss who they elected, but I don't think we should dismiss why they elected him. And I've been spending a lot of time in the Midwest. I was born in Iowa, married a Hoosier girl from Indiana, go there a lot. And when I talk to folks there, for most of them, it's just the idea of America that they see kind of slipping away, which is if you work hard, you do better. And I think that's why they rolled the dice on a billionaire developer from Manhattan. He at least spoke to them. He's incapable of delivering for them. This guy couldn't organize a 2-car funeral.
But he paid attention.
But he paid attention to them, and I think that's still going to be there. Their issues are still there. Jobs are still going away. We're not investing in their kids. Their healthcare costs are going up. We should see that as an opportunity to go to them and offer solutions.
You started. You eventually moved to California, but before you moved to California, you spent some time in Maryland. You went to law school back there?
College and law school. Yeah.
College and law school in Maryland, and you worked for the governor there? Right?
So Martin O'Malley, he was the mayor of Baltimore, came and spoke to my government and politics class when I was at the University of Maryland, and he was a first-term mayor in Baltimore, signed up for his re-election campaign, signed up for his gubernatorial race. He was running against a Republican who was increasing tuition, and I was a kid who was the first in his family to go to college. I was just scraping by, working 2 to 3 jobs in college, and I saw this young mayor who wanted to reduce, the cost of college, invest more in kids, and have been a good friend with him ever since. I was the only member in the House who endorsed him when he ran for president in 2016.
And having watched and observed Martin O'Malley do that, because your name has been floated as a potential presidential candidate for the Democratic side, has he, what have you learned from that? Have you looked at what he did? It kind of worked, right? He got a vice presidential.
He was considered. I saw the commitment. I hated watching him, on the road, away from his kids, and seeing the pain of not being able to, talk to his wife, and the joy that he had when he did get to connect with his wife. That's hard. I've got a wife and a 15-month-old and a daughter on the way just before the midterm elections, and so that's the biggest consideration. If I was to do something like that, I'd want to make sure that I had ideas and a vision that could make a positive change for people. I think that that's what's needed most right now, is to view our country as a big blank canvas and not go back in time. And I think the winning candidate in 2020 is going to be able to take us forward, not get back in the mess that was 2016.
Well, we hope so. But it's difficult being a congressman in the West Coast.
Yeah.
You have a young family. You're talking about a 5-hour flight back and forth. You're in Congress. Our Congress people here, Dina Titus and Shelley Berkeley when she was in Congress, they were back and forth every weekend.
Yep.
Are you doing that?
I do.
That late night flight?
It's a commitment, and your constituents expect you to be present. But I think something that I realized in my first race was that when you go out and knock on doors, and I beat a 40-year incumbent and knocked on over 100,000 doors with our volunteers. Every weekend that I go home, not a time goes by where someone does not come up to me and say, "You knocked on my door." And so I think that's still important to people, more than any policy you believe in. Just knowing that you're there and they can tell you what their concerns are and that you'll listen.
But it's so physically grueling to go back and forth, and it takes such a toll on your family. I mean, when you're a congressman from, like Joe Biden was in the Senate, you know, he took the Amtrak home every night, right? It was not a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're at a big disadvantage out here in the West, if you ask me. Just having to travel back and forth, it's enough to turn a lot of people off.
Yeah, but you know, I don't have any problems I didn't sign up for, so that's all right.
Okay, so then you're at the University of Maryland, and then you ultimately moved back to California on the city council.
So my dad was a police officer when I was growing up, and he always told me when I asked him how I could be a cop like him that absolutely not. He didn't want me to be a cop. He wanted me.
Why?
He thought he had broken his back. He literally did break his back as a cop, and that he wanted me to be the first in the family to go to college and then be a prosecutor. And he would always say to me, you know, I put bad guys away so that you could do that in a courtroom. And so I went to law school and came back home and worked in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, which is an office that Earl Warren was the DA, Kamala Harris, our senator, she got her start in that office. And so joined that office and started out doing misdemeanors and then moved my way up to homicide trials and did that for about 7 years before running for Congress, and also while serving as a city councilman in my hometown of Dublin.
Right, so you kind of you had 3 jobs at one time, basically, right?
And I was coaching a local soccer team, so you know, I was busy. But you know, I do miss the courtroom, and I know, you know, as a lawyer, you appreciate having a judge who can rule on you know, different objectionable actions. And boy, could Washington use a judge right now when the president says something that is hearsay, lacks foundation, you know, is outside of the evidence. So I miss having someone to say, you know, what is fake news and what is real news.
You're on one of the Judiciary Committee, correct?
Judiciary and Intel,
in Congress. The House does not vote on Supreme Court nominees. The Senate does. But you must have feelings about this pending Supreme Kavanaugh.
You know, very strong feelings, and I don't think we're helpless. I actually believe that, you know, we need to make sure first the American people know what's at stake. And to me, there's 3 things at stake. One, there's the question as to whether the president is above the law. This Justice Kavanaugh has said that no president should be criminally indicted or sued civilly. That is, of course, really relevant right now, especially as we're kind of hurtling towards the issue of a grand jury subpoena. 2 is whether a woman has a right to privacy and the ability to make her own health care decisions. Donald Trump has said that it's a litmus test as to whether he will nominate you based on whether you're pro-life or not. And so this judge should be asked, you know, whether he will uphold the precedents of Roe v. Wade. And also the president, remember, said that a woman should be punished if she were to have an abortion. So I think that issue is critically important. And then 3, the Affordable Care Act and a person's right to health care is on the line. Justice Kavanaugh has said that he does not believe that the Affordable Care Act was constitutional. So I think we should maximize, you know, the pressure and advocacy toward the 2 senators that can make the biggest difference, and that would be Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. I think they are the 2 that are most open-minded, and if they were to vote no or to delay the nomination, you know, I think we've got a good chance of defeating this nominee.
Which they did in when they voted on the Affordable Care Act.
That's right. But also, let me just say this, Ed, the vote will be so close to the election that even if the vote does not go our way, and I hope it does, but even if it does not, I think we have an opportunity to tell the voters, look, the Supreme Court cannot always protect us. That's why it's all the more important to elect a Congress that can.
Yeah, now you know that, I mean, these are 3 excellent points you made, and lots of questions that you'd like him to answer, but you know he's not going to answer them because, I mean, there's kind of this precedent that Supreme Court nominees don't really opine on their positions on cases in case they come up before them in the Supreme Court. It's kind of a BS thing, but they all do it, right?
But I think especially with this issue about whether Trump will be interviewed with Mueller, I mean, that's not a hypothetical. That's actually, you know, probably headed to the courts.
Well, isn't it all the more reason why he won't comment on it?
Well, I think we should at least ask, our senators should ask, you know, whether he would recuse himself because he has put out already what his position is on it, and now that we know that this would be a live issue from the president who nominated him, that probably warrants recusal. So I hope he would at least answer that.
Yeah, and of course, you know, the big issue right now is gathering information about this nominee before the hearings, which you know, the Senate Majority Leader has kind of moved up the hearings, so before we get the background on the candidates. I mean, it's outrageous that our Senate is conducting itself like that.
You've hired people, I've hired people. I would never consider somebody for a temporary job, a short-term job, or even a lifetime job if all I had was 10% of everything that they had written in their prior career. We only have 10% of the writings, the public writings of Brett Kavanaugh. I think we should expect, whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president, that their nominee would be able to give us much more than that.
And you know, this Russia thing is of major interest to you. You sit on the Intelligence Committee with, we were talking about Adam Schiff before the show, which you know, you're very fond of him.
Love serving with him.
And he seems like, you know, a really reasonable candidate, or congressman and candidate,
and
I guess.
Great leader right now for us on that committee.
Yeah. So when sitting on that committee, how frustrating is it? Because you have the Republicans controlling it. It's Dennis Nunes, who seems to me to be, I don't know, I would like, if we need to get rid of a congressman, I'm going to say this on TV, he's the one that should go. I mean, here's a guy who it is so obvious is not wanting fair hearings into probably the most important issue facing our country in maybe 50 years.
Yeah, and so this is how it would go down. We would have a conference table, a witness would come in, and we would ask them questions about prior contacts that the Trump campaign or the businesses or the candidate had with Russia. And so many different times, the president's family members, his closest aides, when asked about contacts the president had with Russia, they would just look at us and say, I'm not going to answer that question. And typically in a congressional investigation or, you know, a deposition or in a courtroom, you would look to the person who is controlling the proceeding and you'd say, can you please order the witness to answer the question? And the Republicans each time would say, well, they're here voluntarily. And so it was this kind of circular reasoning where they would not require them to come in under subpoena so that when they refused to answer the question, they could just say, well, we have no control over that. They're here voluntarily. And so we weren't able to get anything. It was a take them at their word investigation, and they were even told that you don't even have to give us your word, you can refuse. And that was so maddening because our country was attacked, and the best thing we could do to prevent a future attack would be to understand how the attack happened, and that would mean uniting as Republicans and Democrats, and at least be willing to ask the questions and force the witnesses to give us the answers.
So where does this leave us in the upcoming election and future elections with social media? I mean, how do we know what facts we're getting, what issue from Facebook, and it seems to me like they're not really inclined to cooperate either.
I think they could do better. You know, Twitter and Google, you know, YouTube, we all could do better. And I think that the first thing that you need is awareness, and that comes from the top. And if the president is not willing to acknowledge that the Russians did this, and the leaders in Congress are not willing to fully acknowledge that the Russians did this, then the American people don't have the awareness they need when they look at their timeline or their news feed to understand, oh, that's fake, you know, a fake post or a troll or a bot from a foreign adversary trying to influence us. Instead, they're just kind of in the wilderness trying to sort this out. And we missed the opportunity to unite and tell them what this looks like and how we can all be better aware.
So would you like to see eventually some legislation that would mandate some of this?
Well, I've written legislation already, and I've got more to come, but the first piece of legislation that I've written is a duty to report. It requires any federal candidate or their campaign aides to report to the FBI if they're approached by an agent of a foreign power offering dirt on their opponent. We found so many people who were offered dirt, didn't say anything. As it relates to the social media companies.
So is that it's not currently a crime?
It's not. Can you believe that? It's not a crime.
It's a crime to do it, but not a crime to not So if somebody offers, hey, I'd like to hire you to kill so-and-so, that would be a crime, right? A person offering to commit that conspiracy, right?
Right.
But when it comes to hacking and fake news and Russians doing what they have to do on Facebook, it's not a crime if they approach somebody.
It's not a crime if you're approached and you just
don't report.
Tell no one. Yeah, and so we think that if an agent of a foreign power comes to you and says, hey, I've got dirt on your opponent, you should have to tell somebody. All of them, to a T, the people who were approached said nothing to law enforcement. Also, about to introduce legislation that would require any social media company, if they see interference activity on their platform, they too would have a duty to report. So that way, if an adversary is paying in rubles, as the Russians were doing, you have to tell the FBI. And so I think there's a lot more we can do to just raise the awareness that the American people have about what our enemies would seek to do in our elections.
Right, and what about the companies themselves, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah, and again, so I think they need leadership from us first, because if we don't have laws for them and they're left to their own, devices, I don't know if they're always going to come forward and tell. Every company is going to have that fear of, if I acknowledge that we've been breached or we've, had a hack, that
not
could
good
affect,
for business.
Yeah, not good for business. The shareholders aren't going to be happy. The stock could plummet, and so I think that's why leadership is passing laws that put a duty and an obligation on them.
Now, of course, a lot of people respond to all this by saying, hey, we do this too.
Yeah.
We do this to other countries. We've done it in South America. We've done it in Eastern European countries.
Yeah, my dad taught me as a kid, two wrongs don't make a right.
Right.
And if we did that in the past, that was wrong. I will not support, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, ever the United States interfering in another democracy and free and fair elections.
Is your father still alive?
Yeah. He's a retired police officer. I have two brothers who are cops. One of them married a cop, and so we're a pretty big law enforcement family.
And you also were a soccer player. You won a soccer scholarship or something in college?
Yeah, I had my heart broken when I didn't make a Little League All-Star team when I was about 12.
Right.
And I've got this Irish twin brother who's 11 months younger than I am, so we'd always play on the same baseball teams.
Okay.
He made the All-Star team. I didn't,
right.
And so I switched to soccer, just thinking that I wasn't going to be any good at baseball anymore.
Right.
And I liked it. I was a goalkeeper and saw that it was a path to going to college, and so went on and played Division I college soccer down in North Carolina. Well, that was my ticket to college.
So hopefully your kids are going to grow up on soccer, right?
Well, I hope they're a little bit better at school than I was. I mean, I couldn't really see beyond the next game when I was playing soccer, and it really felt more like a job because it was my way to get to college. And when I got
you got a scholarship.
Got a scholarship.
Yeah.
And when I got injured, my sophomore year was the best thing that could have happened to me because I thought the world was ending. And a mentor said to me, "Why don't you go intern on Capitol Hill? You'll love it. 10,000 interns go there a year." And so I interned on the Hill in the summer of 2001. Didn't really know if I was a Republican or a Democrat. Fell in love with it, and I've never really turned back.
What did you do as an intern? One of my daughters was an intern for Harry Reid in the Senate one summer, and
you open the mail.
You kind of just
take the phone calls.
You kind of hang out in the cloakroom or something.
You give a lot of tours.
Yeah.
I was there during the summer of 2001. It was a transition time in America. The Bush administration had just come in. Jim Jeffords in the Senate had just switched sides and gave the control of the Senate back to the Democrats. It was an exciting summer. And then I was there on September 11 and saw a very open, sprawling Capitol complex where I could just go anywhere, take constituents anywhere. It became very closed in a very dark place. And then you'd go from opening the mail to having these anthrax scares and having to go to the health clinic to see if you were exposed to anthrax. So I saw Washington at a very exciting time, in 2001 in the summer, and then a very dark time in the days and months after September 11th.
Yeah, there hasn't been much light since.
That's right. That's right. And I, also though appreciate the having interns around, and I always tell them that we're not mind readers. Tell us what your interests are and what issues you want to work on, and we want to help enable that because I knew that when that happened for me as an intern and the senior staff gave me responsibilities, I just ran with it. So I think the interns they're like just a shot in the arm for the energy that you want to have around Capitol Hill.
What's the most important issue to you locally in your congressional district, and then what would be the most important issue to you on a national level?
Yeah. For me locally, it's making sure that we invest in our kids. And what I mean is that I've got school districts where nearly 100% of the kids go on to four-year universities, and then just a stone's throw away, you've got high schools where a third of the kids go on to four-year universities. And so I still see that, for some people, the stock market doing well is tied directly to how well they're doing, and then other people, that number doesn't mean anything. And even worse, they're not seeing investments in modern schools. They're not seeing, job centers coming to them. And so I think the first thing we can do is just, with an infrastructure package, build modern schools for the 21st century in every community, so that every kid who wants to work hard has a chance. And that's locally what I believe. And then nationally, I take what I learned growing up in this small town called Dublin, where all the people around us in other cities called it Scrublin, because when I was a kid, we just had a couple fast food restaurants, no big employers. A third of our high school graduates went on to college. But over the period from when I was in high school to when I came home, our local leaders expanded rapid transit. The BART went out to our area. They started attracting high-end employers. We started, investing in new schools, and they don't call it Scrublin anymore. We've got some of the best schools. We've got Fortune 500 employers there, and I think projecting that across America, where if you really invest in communities, you can connect the disconnected and give people more opportunity.
Yeah, and by the way, before I forget to ask you, coming from the Oakland area, how do you feel about the Raiders coming to Vegas?
That's a sore spot. I hate to see them leave Oakland. I actually grew up, I was ended up being the only Democrat in an all-Republican family, the only Giants fan in an all-A's family, and I'm the only 49ers fan in an all-Raiders family. But, it's still the local
you're
team.
accustomed to minorities.
Yeah, that's right. Kind of, I think just anything to act out against your parents, right? But it's tough to see him leave. I will say that I was frustrated that, the city, I felt, could have done a better job to try and structure a deal. I don't think giving taxpayer dollars away was, the way to do it there. But I felt like, expediting permitting or finding the land to make it happen, it just seemed like, the city never linked up with the team to make it happen. I hope that a lot of Bay Area folks are coming here to support the Raiders. I imagine, this will be the prime destination for every bachelor party in America, to come here to see a Raiders game.
And you continue to be a Raiders fan?
Oh yeah, I'll come here. I'm going to still root for the 49ers if I have to choose between the two. But
when the Raiders are not playing the 49ers, you'll be wearing a Raiders t-shirt?
That's right. That's
right. You're mentioned as one of the Congress people thinking about running for the presidency. When you look at past candidates, they seem to come from the Senate and from the governor's mansion. When's the last time we had a president who was a congressman? It's
been a very, very long time. Garfield was the last.
Okay, and what was that? What year? I don't even know what year that was.
That was a long time ago. But I think that more important is to where they came from professionally. It's where they came from in here. And if they had ideas that were going to take us forward, that's what can win. I think if you look at Democratic presidents, from Obama to Clinton to Carter and Kennedy, they challenged the country to go a leap forward. And I think whoever our candidate is, if we're going to win in 2020, it's going to have to be a leap forward. It's going to have to do bold things like a health care guarantee, to do all we can to strip Citizens United down to the studs and get rid of outside money in politics. It's going to be a massive investment in new schools in America. I think it's going to have to be a bold vision for the future and not be wedded to the past. That's the winning formula.
And I tend to agree with you in what you're saying. And all those issues that you just spoke about seem the vast majority of Americans are in favor of them, but they don't seem, Congress doesn't seem to vote that way. The Affordable Care Act was like the vast majority of people are in favor of it. I mean, this is something that's been close to my heart for 20 years, in trying to put medical care back in the hands of patients and lowering the cost. And it seems to me that it just keeps, year after year, we keep getting worse, going the opposite way in medical care. But most people are in favor of that. Congress can't do anything about it. The money in campaigns, basically the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of that. Right. I don't see much hope of that changing, of taking, money out of the elections.
Here's what we can do if we win the majority. We can, as I said, strip down to the studs the Citizens United ruling. The Supreme Court would have to overturn it, or a constitutional amendment would have to be put in place. We actually, I think, shouldn't give up on a constitutional amendment, because this is something that affects small states as much as it affects big states, so it shouldn't be looked at as, you'd only get the big states on board and the small states wouldn't.
It actually affects the small states more, right? Somebody can,
the money goes
you can make a difference in a small state.
That's right, but there is legislation like the Disclose Act. My colleague John Sarbanes, he has legislation that would require any publicly traded company to disclose to its shareholders, the secret, unlimited money that they're spending in elections, and I think that would have a chilling effect. And consumers would also, be able to know, the products they consume if those companies are spending in elections. And then also, I think we should try and strive for publicly financed campaigns, again, to try and reduce the outside influence. Something else I've noticed is I think more and more about this Russian attack. Our democracy over the past few elections since Citizens United has been open to the highest bidder. And the highest bidder has typically been corporate interests inside America, until the Russians realized that they had an opportunity. And they're going to continue to try and be the highest bidder. And I think the fact that an outside adversary is now, inside our democracy, that's all the more reason to stop, this secret dark money.
By the way, keep your eye on the Chinese, too.
There's a lot of countries who love to get in.
There's a lot to be gained by a lot of foreign nations in that regard. You think your age is a positive or negative if you're contemplating a presidential bid?
I think it's positive, and I think it's more what's the mindset of the candidate. As I said, is the candidate, willing to take us forward on healthcare? You talked about the Affordable Care Act, and to me, it's not just having a guarantee that if you're sick, you'd be seen, and that if you're seen, you won't go broke. It's also that we will invest in cures, and I think we've governed so incrementally in America that we can't invest in the National Institutes of Health, that we can't seek to find cures for Parkinson's, ALS, cancer, and we're just not doing big things anymore. So it's a vision to do big things and unite the country to follow you as you do that.
Thank you so much, Congressman Eric Swalwell,
Yeah.
and good luck.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
Good thing you have insurance. The lady in front of you just called that Bernstein.
Enough said. Call Ed. EdBernstein.com.